A distress signal blared across the Galactic High Council's emergency network, flashing an urgent red on every screen in the system. The message was short, but it sent a cold wave of terror through the assembled diplomats, generals, and scientists. Alert. Humans, HFY said, hold my beer. For a brief moment, silence hung in the vast chamber. Then, chaos erupted. Ambassadors from over 100 civilizations began shouting over one another. Some demanded immediate military intervention. Others pleaded for negotiations. The insectoid Salthar representative was already halfway through drafting a surrender treaty, while the reptilian warlord of the Drakvok pounded the table, his scaled knuckles turning white. This is it, Warlord Crass hissed. This is how they destroy us all. Across the room, High Chancellor Vrex of the Salthar Empire leaned forward, gripping the edge of his console with trembling fingers. His 3 hearts pounded in unison. He had studied humans for years, but even now, their unpredictability sent a chill through his exoskeleton. He turned to his AI assistant, a floating orb of pulsating blue light. Clarify the situation, he ordered. The AI hummed, cross-referencing all historical records of humans using the phrase "hold my beer." The chamber's main display flickered to life, showing classified footage from past incidents. A group of human engineers laughing as they strapped an experimental engine to a cargo ship. The result: a warp jump so unstable, it temporarily reversed time within a 50-light-year radius. A human scientist attempting to fix a black hole containment field with duct tape and enthusiasm. The result: a mini-singularity that played Beethoven's Fifth Symphony whenever approached. A Terran diplomat, during peace talks, saying the phrase before arm wrestling a 6-armed warlord. The result: the collapse of an empire after the warlord species declared the human their new god. And now, the latest alert was coming from the edge of the neutral zone, where a human research vessel, the HFY Icarus, was currently stationed. Put them on screen, Vrex commanded. A hologram flickered, revealing a human captain lounging in his seat with an easy grin. His uniform was slightly unbuttoned, and he held a half-empty bottle of an amber-colored liquid. The room behind him was filled with relaxed crew members, some placing bets, others simply watching in amusement. "Hey, council folks," the captain said, raising a hand in greeting. "We may have, had an idea." Vrex's mandibles twitched. Define idea. "Well," the captain drawled, leaning back, "we figured, why not see if we can punch through subspace using a modified gravity sling? You know, just for science." The chamber erupted once more. Vrex barely heard the voices around him, his gaze locked onto the human's expression. That tone, that look, he had seen it before. It was the same expression humans had when they were about to attempt something that defied all reason, all logic, and all laws of physics. The AI assistant confirmed his fears. Probability of catastrophic event, 97.4%. The captain on screen took a sip of his drink, then grinned. "Anyway, hold my beer. This is gonna be awesome." The transmission cut out. In the stunned silence that followed, Vrex slowly turned to the rest of the council. His voice was barely a whisper. "We need to evacuate the sector." Panic spread through the Galactic High Council like wildfire. Emergency lights bathed the chamber in a blood-red glow as diplomats barked orders to their homeworlds. The phrase had been spoken, "hold my beer," and history had taught the galaxy exactly what that meant. High Chancellor Vrex kept his gaze fixed on the darkened screen, where the human captain's smug grin had last appeared. His mandibles twitched, a nervous tic that only emerged when catastrophe was certain. The Salthar did not fear easily. They were a species built for war, their evolutionary path carved from millennia of conflict and survival. Yet humans had managed to terrify them without firing a single shot. "Get me a direct line to the UHS Icarus," Vrex snapped. His voice echoed, slicing through the bickering of the council. Now, a Drakvok technician scrambled to comply, scales rippling with stress, but the screen remained stubbornly black. The human ship wasn't responding. Vrex's AI assistant, still hovering beside him, pulsed a dim, uneasy blue. Long-range scans indicate the Icarus has activated an experimental gravity field generator, the AI reported. Energy output is increasing exponentially. Vrex clenched his jaw. Define exponentially. The AI's light dimmed further. From initial activation to critical overload, approximately 2 minutes. The council chamber fell into stunned silence. 2 minutes. On the edge of the neutral zone, the Icarus hovered like a quiet predator against the backdrop of a swirling nebula. The ship itself seemed ordinary, a mid-sized research vessel, its hull patched with visible repairs and non-standard modifications. To an untrained eye, it looked barely functional. To anyone who knew humans, it looked far too dangerous. Inside the ship, however, the atmosphere was anything but tense. Captain Elias Drake leaned back in his chair, swirling the last drops of his drink in the bottle. His crew buzzed around him, some checking readouts, others just watching. 2 engineers, a man named Red and a woman named Carson, were laughing as they jotted down last-minute improvements to their contraption. "You really think this'll work?" Red asked, half a grin tugging at his lips. Carson shrugged. "Define work." Drake chuckled. "It'll do something. That's good enough." The device, if it could even be called that, was a tangled mess of wires, glowing conduits, and what looked suspiciously like the core of a scrapped fusion reactor. The central component, a gravity sling, pulsed with an eerie blue light, growing brighter with each passing second. The idea had come up in the most human way possible, a casual conversation over drinks. Someone had asked if it was possible to use gravity itself as a slingshot to punch through subspace and create a shortcut through the galaxy, an impossible concept by all scientific standards. But then someone had said it. Hold my beer. And now they were here, on the precipice of breaking every law of physics known to the galaxy. Captain, one of the more serious crew members, Lieutenant Vega, finally spoke up. "Energy levels are, well, they're doing things energy levels shouldn't do." Drake grinned. "Perfect." Outside the ship, the space around the gravity sling began to distort. Stars seemed to warp and stretch, bending in ways that shouldn't have been possible. A faint humming filled the Icarus, a soundless vibration that pressed against the walls of reality itself. Back at the Galactic High Council, alarms screamed louder. Vrex's AI assistant projected the incoming data. Space-time destabilization detected. Gravitational forces are fluctuating at an unpredictable rate. The localized subspace breach is imminent. The Salfar leader's claws dug into the armrests of his seat. And what will happen if the breach expands? The AI's silence spoke louder than any answer. Vrex swore in his native tongue. How can they be so calm? On the Icarus, Carson was adjusting the final settings on the gravity sling, her hand dangerously close to a lever marked with a piece of tape that simply read, "Don't touch, seriously." "Captain," Vega said again, louder this time. "This could tear a hole straight through subspace." Drake took a slow sip of his drink, his calm demeanor unchanged. "Or," he said, "it could make the first ever shortcut through subspace." There was a long beat of silence. Then he grinned and gave the order. "Fire it up." The gravity sling roared to life. The humming grew into a deafening, teeth-rattling sound as the device twisted the very fabric of the universe. Back in the Galactic Council chamber, the holographic map of the neutral zone lit up like a supernova. Energy readings spiked off the charts. "They did it," whispered an ambassador from the Zelvar species, his voice a mixture of awe and horror. "The humans just broke space." Vrex could only stare as the impossible unfolded before his eyes. And on board the Icarus, Captain Drake leaned back, watching the swirling vortex of impossible colors form in front of his ship, a hole in the universe created because someone, somewhere, had said the fateful words, Hold my beer. The screen went dark. The galaxy held its breath. The vortex the Icarus had created wasn't just a hole in space. It was something worse. It rippled and writhed, a swirling maw of distorted light and fractured reality. Colors that had no name bled into each other, and the fabric of space itself seemed to fold inward, like the universe was trying to heal a wound that refused to close. High Chancellor Vrex stared at the holographic projection in the Galactic High Council chamber, his mandibles clicking softly in disbelief. The rupture was growing, spreading like a crack across a frozen lake. It wasn't just a simple breach. It was a cascading failure of the laws of physics. "Report," Vrex demanded, his voice a dangerous whisper. His AI assistant hovered beside him, flickering erratically, a clear sign that the data it was processing was too volatile, too chaotic. "The spatial anomaly is expanding at an accelerating rate," the AI said. "Gravitational constants are fluctuating. Time dilation detected. Quantum strings unraveling." Vrex's throat tightened. Will it collapse? A pause. Unknown. He clenched his fists. The galaxy's greatest minds had long known the dangers of subspace manipulation. Controlled warp jumps were one thing, a delicate dance with the universe's rules. But this was a sledgehammer to reality itself, and the humans had done it for fun. On board the Icarus, the scene was a jarring contrast to the galactic panic. The crew watched the growing vortex with wide eyes, but not a hint of fear. Some were taking bets, others were recording the event on personal devices. One crew member was even sketching the anomaly in a small notebook. The ship groaned softly as the gravity sling, now dimming from its initial blinding glow, hissed with escaping steam. "Captain," Lieutenant Vega said, her voice steady but urgent, "the breach is growing, faster than we expected." Drake sipped the last of his drink and set the bottle down with a soft clink. "Yeah, that happens sometimes." "That happens?" Vega's eye twitched. Carson, still fiddling with the control panel, didn't even look up. "Relax. We just gave the universe a little poke. It's poking back. Totally normal." The vortex pulsed, sending a ripple of energy that made the ship's lights flicker. Red, now holding a clipboard covered in scribbled equations, and what appeared to be a drawing of a stick figure falling into a black hole, whistled softly. "Captain, the poke might be turning into a punch." Drake grinned. "Then we punch back." Back at the Galactic High Council, panic reached new heights. Species known for their stoicism were now openly shouting, while the more anxious ones were already sending out evacuation orders to colonies near the neutral zone. A hologram from the Zelvar ambassador buzzed into focus beside Vrex. The ambassador's pale, amphibian-like features were twisted with fear. "High Chancellor," the Zelvar croaked, "we must act. If the humans lose control of this anomaly." Vrex silenced him with a sharp gesture. His gaze remained fixed on the swirling vortex projected in the center of the chamber. "Any response from the Icarus?" Vrex asked. "None," the eye replied. "They appear to be preoccupied." The meaning behind that single word sent a fresh wave of anger through Vrex. Preoccupied. The humans were tearing apart reality itself, and they were treating it like a minor inconvenience, like fixing a broken engine or patching a leaky pipe. Another shockwave rippled from the vortex, and this time, it was visible on the galactic map. The wave distorted the surrounding space, bending the orbits of nearby planets ever so slightly. It was subtle, but it was only the beginning. Vrex exhaled slowly. "Prepare the suppression fleet," he ordered. The chamber went silent. Even the most outspoken ambassadors froze. "You're sending warships," the Drakvok warlord rumbled. Vrex's voice was cold. "Not to attack. To contain. If the humans lose control, we have to be ready to seal off the entire sector, no matter the cost." On the Icarus, the situation continued to spiral. though you wouldn't know it from the crew's reactions. The vortex had grown large enough to cast a twisted light across the ship's hull. Space itself seemed to ripple around them, distant stars bending and snapping back into place, like a rubber band stretched too far. Drake leaned back, his boots propped casually on the console. "All right," he said, "let's dial it back a bit." Carson raised an eyebrow. "By dial it back, do you mean fix the breach or make it worse and hope for the best?" "Yes." Vega's voice was dangerously calm. "Captain, I strongly suggest the first option." With a laugh, Drake finally leaned forward and tapped a few buttons on the console. The gravity sling let out a low, angry hum, and the vortex responded, growing even brighter, but stabilizing at the edges. The ripples of distorted space slowed, slightly. Red squinted at the data. "Well, good news is, it's not expanding as fast anymore." "And the bad news?" Vega asked. Carson smirked. "It's still expanding." Drake clapped his hands. Progress. Another shockwave burst from the vortex, this one sending a visible ripple through the Icarus itself. The ship groaned in protest, and the lights flickered once more. But this time, something new happened. A sliver of light appeared at the heart of the vortex, a crack in reality, but different. It wasn't just a hole in space, it was a door. The crew stared. Captain," Red said, his voice tight. "We might have opened something." The sliver of light pulsed again, growing wider. And then something on the other side, something massive, began to move. The galaxy, unaware of what was about to step through, remained frozen in fear. And Captain Elias Drake just smiled. The crack in reality widened. What had once been a swirling, chaotic vortex now seemed almost purposeful. The jagged tear in space no longer thrashed wildly. It pulsed, steady and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of something ancient and immense. And something on the other side was moving. On board the Icarus, the crew fell into an uneasy silence, the kind that only came when the absurd finally gave way to the unknown. The door they had unintentionally opened wasn't just a hole in space. It was a passage to somewhere, or something else entirely. "That's not supposed to happen," Red muttered, his usual smirk replaced with a tight line. His hand hovered over the emergency shutdown controls, but even he seemed to know it was too late for that. Captain Drake didn't flinch. His gaze stayed locked on the glowing fissure, his expression caught somewhere between curiosity and anticipation. The look of a man who had seen the impossible one too many times, and now welcomed it like an old friend. "Vega," Drake finally said, his voice calm. Lieutenant Vega tore her eyes from the growing rift. "Yes, Captain. You ever seen anything like that before?" She blinked. "No, sir." Drake's grin widened. "Good. That means we're making history." The Icarus shuddered again as a ripple of energy cascaded from the rift. This time, however, the shockwave didn't distort space randomly. It felt focused, controlled. The colors within the rift shifted from chaotic hues to a structured, spiraling pattern, like an event horizon was forming at its core. And then, they saw it. A shape emerged from the other side. A silhouette, massive and alien, shifting with a fluid motion that defied the laws of physics. It was as though whatever was behind the rift existed in more dimensions than the human eye could perceive, parts of it phasing in and out of view as it pressed closer. The bridge crew froze. Even Drake, for the first time, leaned forward with a glimmer of genuine surprise. "Captain," Carson's voice was barely above a whisper. "That thing is bigger than our ship." Bigger was an understatement. The entity, whatever it was, loomed behind the rift like a storm cloud, swirling with faint, glowing veins of light running along its fluid, ever-shifting form. It had no clear head, no limbs, just an overwhelming sense of size and presence. And then the rift reacted. It pulsed again, this time with a resonance that vibrated through the ship's hull. The crew's consoles flickered, static dancing across their screens as systems momentarily struggled to make sense of what was happening. "Sir," Vega said, her voice tight, "we need to shut this down. Now." Drake didn't move. His fingers tapped rhythmically against the arm of his chair, his gaze fixed on the entity. "We don't know what happens if we shut it down," he mused. "Could make it worse." "Worse than that?" Red asked, jabbing a finger at the shifting mass on the other side of the rift. Before Drake could respond, the entity moved again, or rather, it seemed to fold closer. The rift widened slightly, and for a brief second, the Icarus's sensors screamed in protest as gravitational anomalies spiked to unreadable levels. A message from the Galactic High Council broke through the static. "U.S. Icarus," Vrex's voice growled, his usually composed tone cracking with tension. "Cease all actions immediately. The rift is expanding, and an unknown entity is attempting to breach into our dimension. You are to power down the gravity sling now." Drake chuckled softly. "Nice to know they're watching." "Captain," Vrex barked through the comms, "do you comprehend the gravity of this situation?" Drake swirled the empty bottle in his hand, then gently set it down. "Pretty sure we're the reason for the gravity of this situation." The comms fell silent for a beat, long enough for another pulse from the rift to rock the ship. Vrex's voice returned, lower this time. "Captain, if this entity crosses into our dimension, it could destabilize reality itself." Drake tilted his head. "So we're in the don't let it in phase of the plan." Red threw his arms up. "Did we ever have a plan?" Carson was already at the gravity sling's controls, fingers flying over the interface. "I can try to reverse the sling's polarity. Maybe push the rift back in on itself." Drake nodded slowly. "Do it." Vega braced herself against the console as the ship shuddered again. "If this doesn't work, Captain." Drake grinned. "Then we'll think of something dumber." The Icarus groaned under the strain of the growing rift, its hull humming as the gravity sling roared back to life. Carson's hands were a blur, recalibrating the device. But the entity on the other side wasn't waiting. It pressed closer, its form now splitting into more jagged shapes, like cracks of lightning frozen mid-strike. A sound, not entirely audible but felt deep in the bones, resonated through the ship. And then, the gravity sling fired. A burst of energy shot into the heart of the rift, and for a moment, space itself folded inward. The vortex shrank violently, pulling at the Icarus like a tidal wave in reverse. The ship lurched, warning sirens blaring as the rift twisted and buckled. The entity, caught mid-cross, writhed, as though it was being pulled back into its own dimension. The light within it flared, and for the first time, a single distinct eye appeared within the chaotic mass, an eye that fixed itself directly on Captain Drake. And then, the rift snapped shut. Silence. The Icarus drifted in the void, the only sound the distant hum of the ship's systems slowly returning to normal. Drake exhaled, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Well," he said softly, "that was exciting." Vega's hands were still gripping the console so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "Captain, what was that?" Drake leaned back in his chair. "Don't know. But I'm guessing it's not the last time we'll see it." Back at the Galactic High Council, Vrex's hologram flickered back into view, his mandibles clicking furiously. "Captain Drake," Vrex hissed, "do you realize what you've done?" Drake picked up his empty bottle, inspected it for a moment, then set it down again. "Yeah," he said with a smirk. "We just knocked on a door we didn't know existed. And somewhere, far beyond the veil of their universe, something had knocked back." The silence after the rift's collapse was more unsettling than the vortex itself. The Icarus drifted through the void, its systems groaning as they recalibrated from the gravitational chaos. Lights flickered, and the ship's hull still thrummed softly, like the universe was struggling to forget what had just happened. On the bridge, the crew remained frozen. Captain Drake leaned back in his chair, his usual smirk lingering, but his eyes were sharp, watching the empty space where the rift had been. His fingers drummed idly on the armrest, but there was a flicker of something behind his calm exterior. Not fear, but something close to it. Curiosity laced with caution. Lieutenant Vega was the first to speak. "The rift, it's gone." Her voice was steady, but barely. "Captain, did we just win?" Red let out a shaky breath, his hand still hovering over the emergency protocols. "Define win, because I'm pretty sure I saw an eye staring at us from another dimension." Carson, still at the gravity sling's controls, wiped the sweat from his brow. "Yeah, that wasn't just a rift. It was a door." Drake didn't respond immediately. His gaze was locked on the patch of space that now looked calm. Too calm. The stars had realigned, and the void seemed to ripple slightly, like a faint scar left behind by the event. "Captain." Vega pressed, her voice a shade more urgent. Drake blinked, the corner of his mouth tugging upward. "We didn't win," he said softly. "We just postponed." The comms crackled, and High Chancellor Vrex's hologram flared back into view, his expression a mask of barely restrained fury. "Captain Elias Drake," Vrex growled, his mandibles twitching. "Explain yourself." Drake chuckled. "I think the results speak for themselves, Your Excellency. Rift's gone. Entity's gone. We're all still here." Vrex's voice dropped into a dangerous calm. "You opened a tear in the fabric of reality. An unknown entity attempted to breach into our dimension, and you call this a success." Drake swirled the empty bottle in his hand again, but there was no humor in his eyes now. "We didn't open the rift on purpose," he said. "It was a side effect of the gravity sling. An unintentional one." Vrex's image flickered. "And yet you continued to experiment despite the danger." Drake's grin tightened. "If we stopped every time something got dangerous, Chancellor, humans would still be sitting in caves rutting sticks together." The bridge went quiet again. Vega's jaw tensed. She knew this was the part where Drake would push too far. He always did. Vrex's mandibles clicked in a series of sharp snaps, a sign of his growing rage. "You jeopardized the stability of this galaxy," he hissed. "The Galactic High Council has agreed. You and your ship are now under direct observation. Any further experiments will require immediate approval from my office." Drake's smile didn't fade, but his fingers gripped the armrest just a bit tighter. "Of course," he said smoothly. "Happy to have you watching over us, Chancellor." The hologram fizzled out, but the tension in the air remained. Carson broke the silence first. "So, what now?" Drake's eyes drifted back to the empty patch of space. "We figure out what that thing was," he said softly, "and why it was trying to get through." Red raised an eyebrow. "You mean we don't just move on and pretend that never happened?" Drake laughed. "Come on, Red. You really think something that big, that powerful, just stumbled through by accident?" Vega's brow furrowed. "You think it was intentional?" Drake leaned forward, his voice low. "I think something on the other side knew we were here. And the second we poked a hole in the universe, it answered." A ripple of discomfort spread through the crew. Carson tapped a few keys on the console. "I'm still picking up faint gravitational echoes," he said. "Like the rift left. Residue." Drake's gaze darkened. "Mark the coordinates. We're coming back." Vega stiffened. "Captain, with all due respect, the High Council just ordered us to stop all experiments." Drake grinned. "Who said anything about experimenting?" Before Vega could argue, another soft beep echoed from the console. A long-range scan alert. Carson's face went pale. Captain." Drake didn't look away from the coordinates. "What now?" Carson's voice wavered. "We're not alone." On the edge of their radar, something was moving. Several somethings. The Icarus's sensors struggled to lock onto the shapes, but they were there, faint outlines at the very edge of the system. And they were massive. Vega's voice dropped to a whisper. "Please tell me those are just asteroids." Carson's hands flew over the controls, running every scan the ship had. Electromagnetic readings, heat signatures, motion trackers, but the shapes didn't match anything natural. Red exhaled slowly. "Captain, they're ships." Drake finally looked up at the display, at the half-dozen enormous vessels inching closer from the void. Their designs were like nothing the crew had ever seen, smooth and fluid, with a strange, organic quality. And their trajectories, all pointed directly at the Icarus. Drake's grin returned, a flicker of excitement in his eyes. "Looks like we got their attention." Vega's voice was ice. "Captain, what if these aren't friendly?" Drake leaned back in his chair. "Then I hope they brought a drink." The void rippled again, and the mysterious ships drew closer. The ships kept coming. The Icarus floated in the vastness of space, its systems quietly humming, but the atmosphere on the bridge felt heavier than the gravity sling's pull. Every eye was locked on the display, where 6 massive vessels loomed at the edges of the system. They weren't moving fast. No sudden charges, no aggressive maneuvers, but their steady approach felt even more unsettling. Distance. Captain Drake's voice was calm, almost too calm. Carson's fingers danced across the console, closing in at .04 light speed, ETA. 6 minutes. Lieutenant Vega didn't blink, her hand resting near the shield controls, ready for whatever came next. "Weapons signatures." "None that I can detect," Carson replied. "But their tech, it's weird. The scanners can't get a solid read on what they're made of, like the ships are bending light or distorting their own mass." Red gave a dry laugh, though his usual humor was missing. "Great. First, a tear in reality. Now ghost ships from God knows where. You sure this is just a normal day for us, Captain?" Drake's smirk was there, but his jaw was tight. "Define normal." "Red." The holographic screen flickered again, static briefly disrupting the view. The ships were massive, sleek, almost organic in design. No visible weapons, no markings or insignias. Just smooth, flowing forms that seemed to pulse faintly, as though they were alive. And still, they advanced. Vega's voice was steady, but with an undercurrent of unease. "Sir, if they wanted to talk, wouldn't they have sent a signal by now?" Drake didn't respond. His mind was already racing, calculating every possibility. There was no record of vessels like these in any galactic High Council database. No trade routes, no diplomatic encounters. Nothing. It was like these ships had stepped straight out of the rift. Carson's voice broke the silence again. "Captain, there's something else." Drake tilted his head. "Let me guess. It gets worse." Carson swallowed hard. "The rift, it's not gone." Vega's head snapped around. "What?" Carson expanded the display, zooming in on the exact coordinates where the rift had closed. At first glance, there was nothing but empty space, the stars still perfectly aligned, the void calm. But then Carson adjusted the sensors, overlaying gravitational data. And there it was, a faint, almost imperceptible scar in spacetime, a ripple that twisted the fabric of reality, too subtle for the naked eye. The rift wasn't open, but it wasn't fully closed either. It was waiting. Drake's voice lowered. "It's still there, just dormant." Red let out a string of curses. "So we didn't shut the door. We just locked it halfway." Carson's fingers tensed on the controls. The alien ships slowed as they neared the invisible scar in spacetime. On the Icarus, the tension was a living thing, thick and suffocating. Every screen on the bridge displayed the approaching vessels, their sleek, organic forms pulsing faintly as if the ships themselves were alive. There was no sign of communication, no weapons charging, just a steady, deliberate advance. 2,000 kilometers in closing, Carson muttered. "They're almost on top of the rift." Captain Drake's fingers tapped slowly on the arm of his chair. His usual grin was gone, replaced by a calculating calm. Still no response to our hails. Vega shook her head. "Nothing. It's like they don't even hear us." Red shifted uneasily. "Or they just don't care." The scarred in space, the leftover ripple from the rift, remained barely visible on their scans, but Drake could feel it. The way the Icarus's systems hummed just a little louder, the faint static that crackled through the comms. Something was still there, something waiting. And now, so were the ships. They came to a stop directly over the rift's coordinates, moving in a synchronized formation, a loose circle surrounding the hidden anomaly. Drake leaned forward. What are they doing? Carson's console beeped softly, gravitational fluctuations increasing again. It's subtle, but, Captain, I think they're reactivating the rift. Vega's eyes widened. That's impossible. It took a gravity sling at full power just to open it. How are they doing this? Before anyone could answer, the first alien ship began to glow. The pulsing lights along its smooth hull intensified, flowing in rhythmic waves like a heartbeat. One by one, the other ships followed, their glow syncing perfectly, forming a silent, eerie pattern of light and motion. And then, the rift twitched. A thin crack of swirling, multicolored energy appeared in the void, small at first, but slowly stretching, as though space itself was being peeled apart again. Red took a step back from his console. Oh, hell no. They're opening it. Carson's voice cracked. The readings are climbing. Fast. It's gonna be bigger than last time. Drake's mind raced. They weren't just facing unknown ships. They were facing something far worse. Beings who understood the rift. These weren't random explorers who stumbled upon the anomaly. They were deliberate, methodical. They knew. Captain, Vega said softly, we have to stop them. Drake didn't respond right away. His eyes locked onto the growing rift, the crack widening inch by inch, glowing brighter with every pulse from the alien fleet. If they let this happen, there was no telling what might come through. And something would come through. He clenched his jaw. Red charged the gravity sling. Red blinked. You want to fire at them? No, Drake said. We're not attacking. We're interfering. If they're using some kind of resonance to reopen the rift, maybe we can disrupt it. Carson's hands flew across the controls. We can overload the sling. Push a gravity wave in the opposite direction of their pulse. It might destabilize the rift again. Vega's voice was tight. And if it doesn't? Drake smiled grimly. Then we pray whatever's on the other side isn't too friendly. The gravity sling roared to life, a deep, bone-rattling hum as the Icarus channeled its remaining power into the device. Energy rippled through the ship's hull, and the bridge lights flickered as the systems strained under the load. The rift crackled, now the size of a small moon, swirling and pulsating as the alien ship's glowing patterns grew more intense. Almost ready, Carson said through gritted teeth. On your mark, Captain. Drake waited, his gaze locked on the rift. And then, the rift twitched again. For a split second, a shape moved behind the swirling energy, massive and indistinct, but there. A shadow that rippled and stretched, far too large for any ship, with a strange, fluid motion that made the laws of physics feel like a distant suggestion. Red's voice cracked. Ugh, Captain. Something's on the other side. Drake's heart pounded. Fire the sling. Now. The Icarus unleashed a gravitational shockwave, the force slamming into the rift like a tidal wave. The ripple distorted, buckling under the sudden push. The crack in space flickered wildly, twisting and collapsing in on itself. The alien ships responded instantly. The pulsing lights along their hulls shifted, patterns unraveling into chaos as they tried to compensate. One ship drifted backward, struggling to maintain its position as the gravitational backlash rippled through the area. The rift buckled again, and then it snapped shut. Silence. The ship stopped glowing. The bridge of the Icarus was deathly quiet. The only sound the soft hum of the gravity sling powering down. Carson's voice came in a whisper. It's gone. The rift's gone. Drake didn't move, his eyes still fixed on the spot where the rift had been. What about the ships? Vega studied the readings, holding position, but they've stopped whatever they were doing. Red let out a long, shaky breath. Did we just win again? Before Drake could answer, the largest alien ship pulsed once more, not the chaotic glow from earlier, but something slower. And then, a signal. Not words, not in any language the Icarus could translate, but a pulse of energy, steady and clear. A message. Drake leaned forward, his jaw tight. Carson, what's it saying? Carson's hands trembled as he translated the frequency. It's a warning. Vega's voice broke the silence. A warning about what? Carson swallowed. They weren't trying to open the rift. They were trying to seal it. Permanently. The crew stared at the alien fleet, the ships now slowly retreating, as if their work was done. Drake's heart pounded. Then what the hell was trying to come through? Carson didn't answer, because there was no answer. Whatever had been on the other side of that rift, that massive, shifting shadow, was still there, waiting. And somewhere deep in the void, far beyond the reach of their universe, something knocked. Again.